giving us some information relative to the death penalty in the state of Tennessee. Dr. Woods, let's, as we promised, let's pick up where we left off, dealing with sort of a historical statement in reference to the death penalty in the state of Tennessee.
Focusing on Tennessee, before 1978, the death penalty in Tennessee was available for a large number of felony offenses, and it was simply up to the district attorney, the trial judge, and the jury to decide whether the punishment would be death penalty or life imprisonment or a term of years, whether you were talking about murder or rape or armed robbery or any number of other offenses. Then the Supreme Court stepped in 1972 in a case called Furman versus Georgia and ruled and pointed out that for a long time in our history, the death penalty had been used in very discriminatory fashion. The people who were winding up on death row were folks who could not afford a lawyer, who were almost always a minority, African American, Latina, Hispanic, poor white, and there was very little supervision by the courts of who received the death penalty and who didn't. And the best way to illustrate that in Tennessee is typically in the last 3 or 4 decades, we'll have about 1,000 or 1,100 people convicted of murder in our state prison system. Of those approximately 1,100 murderers, only about 100 received the death penalty sentence. And therefore, the idea in theory was we'll sentence to death only the worst of the murderers, the worst of the worst. But the problem was, you know, if I get arrested and I can't afford a lawyer before the 1972 embargo on the death penalty, in theory I'd get an appointed lawyer, but in practice, all up through the 1960s, if I didn't have my own lawyer, I was in desperate trouble. I wasn't going to understand what was going on as the defendant in terms of court procedure, penalties, and the judge wasn't going to be in any position to help me. And therefore, we filled up death rows all over the country, including Tennessee, with people who were not the worst of the worst. I'm not saying they were angels, I'm saying they weren't the worst of the worst. The Supreme Court got very concerned we were putting innocent people on death row, which we were in at least about 6 to 8% of the cases. That doesn't sound like a lot till you stop and realize that any time on death row in modern times, we've got 3,000 to 4,000 people. So we're talking about a very large number of innocent people at that point. So the court finally in 1976 said if states, including Tennessee, will follow certain procedures, they can reinstitute the death penalty. Our legislature passed a new death penalty in 1978. It was then declared unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court. Finally, about 1979, we got a death penalty created by the legislature that the courts, that the DAs, that the system could use. And that system essentially says